In 18 months, this fat, ugly plane would kill 3,662 German fighters and end Luftwaffe air superiority forever. They called it the Jug. Fat, ugly, underpowered. The Luftwaffe pilots laughed when they first saw the P-47 Thunderbolt lumber into European skies in April 1943. 7 tons of American steel that looked more like a flying bathtub than a fighter. But what happened next broke every assumption about aerial combat and left the German Air Force bleeding from wounds they never saw coming. The numbers were brutal from day one. April through September 1943, 200 P-47s shot down versus 89 German kills. The math was simple and devastating. Every sortie was a coin flip with death. Radio chatter from returning pilots painted the picture in stark terror. "Sir, we can't climb with the 109s. We can't turn with them. What exactly are we supposed to do up there besides die?" Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski sat in his cockpit at Boxted Airfield, England, staring at mission orders that might as well have been death warrants. September 9th, 1943. Another escort mission deep into Germany. Around him, ground crews loaded 8 50 caliber machine guns into his P-47D, each gun carrying 267 rounds. The sound of ammunition belts feeding into wing bays was like rattling chains, and felt just as ominous. The morning air carried the smell of high-octane aviation fuel and cordite from yesterday's returning aircraft. But what the Luftwaffe didn't know was that Republic Aviation had built something unprecedented. The P-47 wasn't just the heaviest single-engine fighter ever created. It was a flying fortress designed around one terrifying principle: survive what kills other planes, then hit back with overwhelming force that would reshape the entire war. The mockery started immediately when the first P-47s arrived in England. RAF pilots called them flying milk bottles. German intelligence reports described them as typically American, oversized, overcomplicated, and underperforming. Hauptmann Johannes Steinhoff of JG-26 wrote in his combat diary, "The new American fighter appears designed by someone who has never seen aerial combat. It climbs like a pregnant cow and turns like a freight train. Our 109s will make short work of these elephants." The early combat reports seemed to confirm German confidence. May 4th, 1943, over St. Omer, 6 P-47s jumped by 12 Focke-Wulf 190s. Result, 4 Thunderbolts shot down, 0 German losses. May 15th, over Antwerp, 8 P-47s versus 10 Messerschmitt Bf 109s. Result, 3 P-47s down, 1 damaged German fighter. The pattern was clear and terrifying for American pilots. Captain Don Blakesley of the 4th Fighter Group wrote to his wife, "Honey, I won't lie to you. These new jugs are getting us killed. We can't fight the way we're used to fighting. Every mission feels like a suicide run. The Germans are running circles around us, and all we can do is try to stay alive long enough to learn how to use this beast." They had no idea what was coming. Then everything changed on October 14th, 1943. Black Thursday, over Schweinfurt. While B-17s were getting massacred by German interceptors, something impossible happened. Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson, flying P-47 Half-Pint, took 21 cannon hits from Focke-Wulf 190s. His cockpit canopy shattered into razor fragments that sliced through his leather flight jacket. Oil pressure dropped to 0 as black fluid sprayed across his windscreen. Hydraulic fluid mixed with his own blood from dozens of cuts, creating a crimson slick across the instrument panel. The stick went mushy in his hands as control cables severed one by one. For 8 minutes that felt like 8 hours, Johnson flew a dying aircraft through 200 miles of German-controlled airspace, while FW-190 pilot Egon Meyer pursued him like a wolf hunting wounded prey. Meyer pumped round after round into the battered Thunderbolt, watching pieces of wing and fuselage spiral away in the slipstream. The German ace later wrote, "I emptied my ammunition into this aircraft. I saw pieces falling off, saw my shells exploding in the fuselage and wings. Flames erupted from the engine cowling, but it continued flying. I could not believe what I was seeing. No aircraft should survive such punishment. It defied everything I knew about combat aviation. Johnson's aircraft was dying around him. The engine coughed and sputtered, missing on 3 cylinders. The right aileron hung loose, flapping in the 300 mph airstream. Fuel leaked from punctured tanks, leaving a vapor trail that sparkled in the October sunlight. But the massive radial engine kept turning, kept pulling, kept fighting. Johnson made it back to Manston Airfield with his P-47, looking like it had been fed through a meat grinder. Ground crews counted 21 cannon hits and 89 machine gun strikes. The engine had 3 cylinders completely destroyed, pistons blown out through the cowling. The right wing had a hole large enough to crawl through. The fuselage looked like Swiss cheese, but the aircraft had flown 350 miles and landed safely, its pilot walking away with minor cuts. Chief Master Sergeant Mike "Hammer" Kowalski, who had worked on aircraft since the Great War, stared at Johnson's P-47 in disbelief. "Sir, I've seen fighters come back shot up before, but this shouldn't be flying. This shouldn't even be in one piece. Whatever they built into this machine, it's something different, something new." That night, German radio intercepts captured Mayer's report to his squadron commander. "Either our ammunition is defective, or the Americans have built something we do not understand. I shot this aircraft to pieces, but it refused to die. Request immediate intelligence assessment of American fighter construction methods. If this is blowing your mind, hit subscribe, because these numbers get even more insane." The equation had changed completely by December 1943, but the true nature of that change wouldn't become clear until engineers examined Johnson's aircraft. What they found rewrote everything they thought they knew about fighter design. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine wasn't just powerful, it was virtually indestructible. While German fighters relied on liquid-cooled engines that died from a single coolant line hit, the R2800 was air-cooled with 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows, lose 3 cylinders. The other 15 kept running at 75% power. Take cannon hits to the engine block. The distributed design meant no single point of catastrophic failure. German pilots were used to one good burst, killing any Allied fighter. The P-47 absorbed their best shots and kept fighting. Republic's chief engineer, Alexander Kartveli, had designed the engine installation around a radical concept: redundancy through brute force. Instead of elegant solutions, he chose overwhelming excess. Instead of lightweight efficiency, he selected massive durability. The result was an engine that weighed as much as an entire Messerschmitt Bf 109, but could run with half its cylinders destroyed. But the engine was just the beginning. Republic had built the Thunderbolt around a philosophy that seemed insane to European designers: make it so tough that weight becomes irrelevant. The result was an aircraft that weighed more than some twin-engine bombers, but could absorb punishment that would disintegrate a Spitfire or Messerschmitt. The airframe itself was a marvel of brute force engineering. Where British designers used elegant aluminum construction, Republic used massive steel forgings. Where German engineers relied on precise tolerances, Americans chose overwhelming thickness. The main wing spar could support 12 Gs when most fighters failed at 6 Gs. The landing gear was strong enough to support a medium bomber. The control surfaces were so robust they could function with 70% damage. Major General William Kepner, commanding 8th Fighter Command, received a classified report on December 15, 1943, that changed Allied fighter tactics forever. The report, based on detailed analysis of 47 combat-damaged P-47s that had returned from missions, revealed something extraordinary. Thunderbolt structural integrity exceeds all previous fighter aircraft by factors of 300–400%. Aircraft can sustain damage that would destroy 3 conventional fighters and continue mission effectiveness. Recommend immediate tactical doctrine revision to exploit these characteristics. They had built a flying tank that could fight like a race car. But what they didn't know was that this 7-ton behemoth was about to become the most feared aircraft in European skies, not despite its weight, but because of it. January 1944 brought the first hints of what the Thunderbolt could really do. Allied intelligence intercepted German radio traffic from JG-26. American fighters now diving through our formations at impossible speeds. Standard escape tactics ineffective. Repeat, escape tactics ineffective. Request immediate tactical revision. The transmission was from Oberleutnant Klaus Mitusch, one of Germany's most experienced pilots, with 72 victories. He never made it home from that mission. Here's what had happened. The P-47's 7-ton weight, the same characteristic the Germans mocked, became its deadliest weapon in a dive. Physics doesn't lie. A Thunderbolt diving from 25,000 feet could reach 550 mph, faster than any German fighter could follow. Terminal velocity calculations showed that pursuing FW-190s would exceed structural limits at 480 mph. The sound alone was terrifying, a screaming banshee wail that German ground troops learned to fear more than incoming artillery. Lieutenant Hans Dorr of JG-2 described his first encounter in a letter to his wife. Liebling, I cannot describe the terror of seeing these American fighters diving on us. The sound builds like an approaching freight train, a deep mechanical roar that shakes your bones. Then suddenly they are there, massive shapes roaring past at impossible speed, guns blazing like the fires of hell. 8 50-caliber machine guns firing in unison sound like tearing canvas, amplified 1,000 times. By the time you react, they are already climbing away, preparing for another attack. We call them Todesengel, angels of death. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was what happened when it pulled out of that dive at 400 mph, pulling 8 Gs, while most fighters would disintegrate under half that stress. Most fighters disintegrated under those G-forces. The P-47 was built like a suspension bridge designed by paranoid engineers. Its massive wing structure, originally designed to carry that enormous engine, could handle pullouts that would rip the wings off a Messerschmitt Bf-109 or Focke-Wulf 190. German pilots found themselves in an impossible situation: follow the diving Thunderbolt and die from structural failure, or let it escape and face its guns another day. The psychological effect was devastating and immediate. By February 1944, Luftwaffe pilots reported dive terror, the paralyzing fear that came when P-47s appeared at altitude. Flight surgeons documented increased heart rates, sweating, and panic attacks among German pilots who had previously shown no signs of combat stress. They knew what was coming: screaming death from above at speeds they couldn't match, followed by climbing attacks they couldn't counter. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Schmidt wrote in his diary, "We used to own the sky. Now we pray the Americans don't see us. When those Thunderbolts appear above, we know half our squadron won't return. It's not fighting anymore. It's systematic slaughter from machines we cannot match." Then came the escort missions that changed everything forever. March 6, 1944. Big week. The largest air battle in history was about to begin. 800 American bombers heading deep into Germany, protected by 144 P-47s, flying their longest mission yet, 475 miles to Berlin and back. The Luftwaffe threw everything they had, 400 interceptors rising to meet them in what would become the decisive air battle of World War II. In the pre-dawn darkness at Boxted Airfield, P-47 pilots received their briefing from Colonel Hub Zemke. The words were stark. "Gentlemen, today we find out if all our training means anything. The Germans are going to throw their entire fighter force at us. Our job is simple: get the bombers to Berlin and back. Everything else is secondary." The briefing room smelled of coffee, cigarettes, and nervous sweat. Outside, ground crews performed final checks on 144 Thunderbolts, each aircraft representing $85,000 of American industrial might. At 0847 hours, 144 P-47 Thunderbolts lifted off from 8 different airfields across England. Each aircraft carried 2,078 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition and enough fuel for 5 hours of combat. The total weight of ammunition alone was 37 tons, enough firepower to level a city block. The combined horsepower of their engines was 288,000, equivalent to 400 automobiles at full throttle. The German plan was textbook Luftwaffe doctrine: hit the bombers before the escorts could react, use superior climb rate and turning ability to outmaneuver the heavy American fighters. At 14:23 hours, over Brandenburg, 400 German fighters struck from above, diving through the bomber stream at maximum speed in the largest coordinated attack since the Battle of Britain. The sky over Berlin filled with aircraft. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s dove through the bomber formations, their 20mm cannons and 30mm guns tearing into flying fortresses and liberators. For 3 minutes, it looked like a repeat of previous disasters, American bombers falling like burning leaves while German fighters dominated the airspace. Then, at 14:27, something unprecedented happened. The Thunderbolts didn't try to dogfight. Instead, they did something the German pilots had never seen before. They formed up into 4 plane elements and began systematic energy fighting, using their superior diving speed to make slashing attacks, never staying to turn, always maintaining speed advantage. The sky over Berlin became a 3-dimensional chess game played at 300 mph with bullets and death. Major Francis Gabreski led the 56th Fighter Group into combat that day, flying P-47 D-15 HVA. At 14:31, he spotted a formation of 12 Focke-Wulf 190s climbing to intercept the lead bomber box. What happened next lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds and demonstrated the lethal evolution of American fighter tactics. Gabreski's 4-ship dove from 27,000 feet, building speed to 520 mph. The FW-190s, climbing at 180 mph, never saw them coming. At 400 yards, Gabreski opened fire with all 8 50 caliber guns. The combined muzzle velocity was 2,140 feet per second, enough kinetic energy to punch through armor plating. The rate of fire was 800 rounds per minute per gun, 400 rounds per minute total. In 3 seconds, Gabreski's P-47 fired 320 bullets weighing 22 pounds. The lead Focke-Wulf disintegrated, literally. Wings separated from fuselage as 50 caliber rounds tore through the aircraft structure like a chainsaw through paper. The pilot, Hauptmann Heinrich Sturm, a veteran with 34 victories, never had time to bail out. His aircraft went from intact fighter to falling debris in 1.3 seconds. But what they didn't know was that Hub Zemke had been developing these tactics for 8 months, specifically designed around the P-47's unique characteristics. Zemke's dive and climb doctrine revolutionized fighter combat forever. Instead of trying to outturn German fighters, his pilots would use hit-and-run attacks, diving in at high speed, firing a devastating burst, then climbing away using the P-47's superior high-altitude performance. The Germans found themselves chasing ghosts. Every time they turned to engage, the Thunderbolts were already climbing out of range, setting up for another attack. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. German radio chatter, intercepted by Allied listening posts, painted a picture of confusion and growing panic. They hit us and disappear. Cannot maintain contact with American fighters. Schwarzer Tag, Black Day. We are being systematically destroyed. Mein Gott, they are everywhere at once. Lieutenant Hans Miller of JG-11 survived that day's combat and later described the experience in his post-war interrogation. It was like fighting shadows made of steel and thunder. You would see them diving from impossible altitude, hear the terrible noise of their engines building to a scream. then the world would explode around you. The sound of their 8 machine guns firing together was like God tearing the sky apart. Before you could react, they would be gone, climbing away while you struggled to follow. Before you could turn to pursue, they were diving on you again from a different angle. It was systematic murder disguised as air combat. The numbers from that single day were staggering and would reshape the entire European air war. Luftwaffe losses: 69 fighters shot down, 23 more destroyed on the ground during follow-up strafing attacks. American bomber losses: 11 B-17s and 6 B-24s, remarkably light for such a deep penetration mission. P-47 losses: 11 aircraft. The kill ratio was 6.3 to 1 in favor of the Americans, a complete reversal of the situation just 6 months earlier. But the real victory wasn't in the numbers, it was in what happened next. If these numbers are shocking you, smash that like, because what came after Big Week was even more devastating for the German Air Force. German fighter tactics began to change almost immediately, and the desperation was obvious in intercepted communications. Luftwaffe training manuals from April 1944 show new defensive doctrines specifically designed to counter P-47 attacks. Avoid prolonged combat with Thunderbolt formations, read Tactical Bulletin 44-7. Maintain altitude advantage at all times. Do not pursue diving attacks below 15,000 feet. Engage only when numerical superiority exceeds 3.1. Priority remains bomber destruction. Fighter combat to be avoided unless absolutely necessary. The manual continued with unprecedented defensive instructions. Thunderbolt aircraft demonstrate structural integrity far exceeding previous Allied fighters. Cannon strikes that would destroy Spitfire or Hurricane have minimal effect. Sustained attacks required for kills. Recommend concentration of fire from multiple aircraft. They were no longer trying to win air-to-air combat. They were just trying to survive it. Major Heinrich Bahr, one of Germany's leading aces with 124 kills, wrote in his combat diary, "The Americans have learned to use their aircraft's strengths while negating ours. We can no longer rely on superior maneuverability when they refuse to maneuver. They have turned air combat into a physics problem, and physics favors the heavier aircraft. Our advantages in climb rate and turning radius mean nothing when they attack from altitude and refuse to turn fight." But what Bahr didn't know was that the P-47 was about to evolve beyond pure fighter into something the Luftwaffe couldn't counter at all. By May 1944, the P-47 had transformed into something that shouldn't have been possible, according to German doctrine. A fighter bomber capable of carrying 2,500 pounds of ordnance while maintaining full air-to-air capability. This wasn't supposed to exist. German engineering philosophy insisted you couldn't build an aircraft that excelled at both roles. The Americans had just proven that philosophy wrong, with 7 tons of flying contradiction. The transformation happened during preparation for Operation Overlord. While German fighters tried to intercept Allied bombers at high altitude, P-47s were learning to operate at treetop level, destroying everything that moved. The sound of 8 50 caliber machine guns firing in unison became the soundtrack of German retreat, a mechanical death rattle that announced the arrival of American air power. Captain Robert Johnson, the same pilot who had survived 21 cannon hits in October, now found himself leading dive-bombing attacks against German supply columns in the Norman countryside. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, I was just trying to survive long enough to get home. Now I'm hunting German tanks with the same aircraft they said was too fat to fight. Yesterday, I shot down 2 109s in the morning and bombed a railroad bridge in the afternoon. Same aircraft, same pilot, same war, but everything has changed. The P-47's transformation into a fighter bomber wasn't theoretical. It was devastatingly practical. Each Thunderbolt could carry 2 1,000-pound bombs or 8 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVAR, while retaining all 8 50-caliber machine guns and full ammunition load. The result was an aircraft that could destroy a tank with rockets, demolish a building with bombs, and shoot down any fighter that tried to interfere. June 6, 1944, D-Day. As Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, 36 squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts provided close air support, flying 1,067 sorties in the first 24 hours. They encountered virtually no German fighter opposition. The Luftwaffe had been bled white over the preceding months. Their experienced pilots dead, their replacement pilots undertrained and terrified of the Jabos, fighter bombers that dominated both air and ground. The statistics from the first month of the Normandy campaign tell the story of systematic destruction. P-47s destroyed 3,077 motor vehicles, 58 locomotives, 469 railway cars, 23 tanks, 17 ammunition dumps, and 89 bridges. The German army wasn't just losing air superiority, it was losing the ability to move supplies or reinforcements during daylight hours. Rommel's Atlantic Wall had become a prison, with P-47s as the jailers. Oberst Adolf Galland, commanding the Luftwaffe fighter force, sent a desperate message to Hermann Göring on June 15th. The American Thunderbolt has achieved what we thought impossible. Complete air superiority combined with devastating ground attack capability and total psychological dominance. Our pilots report that the sound of approaching P-47s causes panic among ground troops. Infantry abandon positions at the first sound of their engines. We have lost control of our own airspace during daylight hours. Göring's response was characteristic and delusional. Impossible. No single aircraft can dominate multiple mission profiles. Our intelligence must be flawed. Improve pilot training and increase sortie rates. By this time, average Luftwaffe pilot training had dropped to 40 hours before first combat mission. They were sending children to fight seasoned veterans in aircraft they couldn't match, with tactics they couldn't counter, in skies they no longer controlled. Then everything changed again with the arrival of paddle blade propellers and water injection systems. What happened next broke everything they knew about the P-47's limitations. The new paddle blade propellers, installed beginning in July 1944, increased climb rate by 370 feet per minute, from 2,650 fpm to 3,020 fpm at sea level. Water injection systems boosted emergency power to 2,300 horsepower for 5-minute intervals, compared to the standard 2,000 horsepower rating. Suddenly, the fat jug could climb with Focke-Wulfs and outrun anything the Germans had at any altitude. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, now commanding the 61st Fighter Squadron, took the first water injection P-47 into combat on July 20, 1944. His target: a formation of 16 Messerschmitt Bf-109s at 28,000 feet over Caen. What followed lasted 6 minutes and demonstrated the complete transformation of the aircraft the Germans had once dismissed as hopeless. Using water injection, Gabreski's P-47 climbed from 15,000 to 28,000 feet in 4 minutes and 12 seconds, faster than the climbing Messerschmitts. The German formation leader, Hauptmann Gunther Rall, later recalled in his post-war interrogation, "This was impossible according to our intelligence reports. The heavy American fighter appeared below us at 15,000 feet, then climbed through our formation faster than our aircraft could climb. It defied everything we knew about the performance characteristics of this machine." Gabreski opened fire at 200 yards with all 8 guns, destroying 2 Bf-109s in a single burst. The remaining German fighters scattered, but the P-47's new climb performance allowed Gabreski to pursue and destroy a third Messerschmitt before the survivors could escape. 3 kills in 6 minutes against Germany's premier high-altitude fighter. The psychological impact was devastating and final. German pilots who had grown accustomed to altitude advantage as their last refuge suddenly found P-47s above them, diving down with enough speed to catch anything and enough firepower to destroy it. There was nowhere left to hide, no altitude safe from American reach. But what they didn't know was that Republic aviation had solved the P-47's only remaining weakness: range. August 1944 brought drop tanks that extended combat radius to 475 miles. Paper tanks, fabric tanks, pressed steel tanks. Whatever it took to carry enough fuel to escort bombers to targets deep in Germany and still have reserves for extended combat. Paper tanks held 75 gallons, pressed steel tanks held 108 gallons, and the new 150-gallon ferry tanks could extend range to 850 miles one way. Now, Thunderbolts could appear anywhere within a 950-mile diameter circle centered on England. The transformation was complete. P-47s could take off from England, escort bombers to targets as distant as Berlin, engage in prolonged air combat, conduct ground attack missions, and still return home with fuel to spare. No German fighter could match this operational flexibility. The Luftwaffe found themselves outranged, outgunned, and overwhelmed by aircraft that appeared everywhere at once. The psychological effect on Luftwaffe pilots was complete and devastating. Obergefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote in his final letter home, "There is nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The American Thunderbolts appear everywhere at once, over our own airfields, over our supply lines, over our retreat routes. We take off knowing we will not return. This is not war anymore. This is systematic extermination carried out by machines we cannot match, flown by pilots we cannot defeat." Hoffmann was shot down by P-47s 2 days later, one of 47 German pilots killed that week by the 56th Fighter Group alone. His aircraft was found scattered across 3 miles of Norman countryside, destroyed by a single burst from 8 50-caliber machine guns. German pilot training collapsed completely under the weight of impossible odds. With experienced instructors dead and fuel reserves exhausted, new Luftwaffe pilots received an average of 40 flight hours before their first combat mission. American P-47 pilots averaged 240 hours of training before entering combat. The disparity was criminal. Germany was feeding children to experienced killers flying aircraft designed for exactly this kind of systematic destruction. Major Heinrich Bahr, who had survived longer than most with 124 victories, wrote his final combat report on September 3, 1944. "The Americans have built something we cannot match. Their Thunderbolt absorbs our fire, delivers crushing attacks, and appears everywhere at once. We are no longer fighting individual aircraft. We are fighting an entire system designed to destroy us. I have 124 victories against all Allied fighter types, but against the P-47, I feel like a student pilot again." Bahr was shot down by P-47s 3 days later near Metz. He survived the war, but his aircraft and his confidence didn't. The equation had become impossibly lopsided. By September 1944, P-47s were achieving kill ratios of 4.6 to 1 against all German fighter types. Against the vaunted Focke-Wulf 190, traditionally Germany's most dangerous interceptor, the ratio climbed to 6.1 to 1. Against the Messerschmitt Bf 109, the backbone of the Luftwaffe, the ratio was 5.2 to 1. The hunters had become the hunted, and the hunted had become extinct. In 8 seconds, everything flipped completely. October 12, 1944, marked the day Luftwaffe Fighter Command officially admitted defeat against the Thunderbolt. Intercepted communications showed new standing orders from Oberkommando der Luftwaffe. Avoid combat with P-47 formations unless overwhelming numerical advantage can be achieved. Priority targets remain bombers only. Fighter versus fighter combat to be avoided, except in direct defense of Reich territory. Pilots are forbidden from pursuing diving Thunderbolts below 15,000 feet altitude. They were no longer trying to win air superiority. They were just trying to delay their own annihilation. The final insult came in November 1944, when P-47s began carrying 1,000-pound bombs while maintaining full air-to-air armament. German ground forces reported that approaching Thunderbolts carried enough ordnance to level city blocks, while retaining the ability to destroy any fighter sent to intercept them. It was the ultimate military contradiction, an aircraft that excelled at everything while specializing in nothing except winning. Tell me in comments, could you make the call to ground your entire fighter force rather than face these impossible odds? Colonel Johannes Steinhoff, the same pilot who had called the P-47 a pregnant cow in 1943, wrote his final assessment in December 1944. "We were wrong about everything. The Americans did not build a fighter. They built a flying battleship that could fight like a destroyer and bomb like a dive bomber. Our pilots report that single P-47s attack entire squadrons and win. This should not be possible, but it happens daily. We have created nothing that can match it." By Christmas 1944, the Luftwaffe was effectively extinct as an air superiority force. German aircraft production continued at underground facilities, but pilot production had stopped completely. The few remaining experienced pilots were either dead, captured, or grounded due to fuel shortages that left training aircraft sitting empty. The P-47 had accomplished what strategic bombing couldn't, the complete destruction of German air power through systematic attrition. The final numbers tell the complete story of this one-sided massacre. From April 1943 to May 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts flew 546,000 combat sorties in Europe. They shot down 3,662 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat and destroyed 202 more on the ground during strafing attacks. They demolished 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. Total tonnage of German equipment destroyed, 1.2 million tons. Cost to replace destroyed equipment, 4.7 billion Reichsmarks. Money Germany didn't have. All while losing 3,077 aircraft to all causes, enemy action, mechanical failure, and accidents combined. The kill ratio was 2.17 to 1 overall, but those numbers don't tell the real story. Most P-47 losses came from ground fire during low-level attacks, not air-to-air combat. In pure fighter versus fighter combat, the ratio was 4.6 to 1 in favor of the Americans. But the most devastating statistic was hidden in German personnel records. By December 1944, average Luftwaffe pilot experience had dropped to 40 flight hours before first combat mission. Their veteran pilots were dead, shot down by an aircraft they'd once dismissed as too slow, too heavy, too ugly to matter. The P-47 had literally killed an entire generation of German fighter pilots. The fat jug had eaten the Luftwaffe alive, one screaming dive at a time. What started as mockery ended in respect, born from absolute terror. German pilot Günther Rauhl, third highest scoring ace in aviation history with 275 victories, said after the war, "The P-47 was the most dangerous opponent we faced. Not because it was the most agile or fastest, but because it never gave up. You could hit it, damage it, see pieces falling off, and it would still be there, guns firing, pilot fighting. It had no quit in it, just like the men who flew it. The respect was mutual, but came too late." Colonel Hub Zemke, who had developed the tactics that made the P-47 so deadly, wrote in his post-war memoir, "The Germans were brave pilots flying good aircraft, but they were fighting an industrial war with artisan tools. We built the P-47 like we built our factories, tough enough to run forever, powerful enough to break anything, and numerous enough to be everywhere at once. They never had a chance once we learned how to use it." By war's end, Republic Aviation had produced 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts. They served in every theater, with every Allied Air Force, from the frozen tundra of Alaska to the burning deserts of North Africa. But it was over Europe where they earned their reputation as the aircraft that broke the back of German air power forever. The Thunderbolt's legacy wasn't just in its numbers. It was in proving that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the most elegant one. Sometimes you need something built like a brick shithouse that hits like a sledgehammer and refuses to die no matter how much punishment it takes. The Germans learned this lesson too late to matter. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Johnson, who had started the war, barely surviving 21 cannon hits, ended it as the second highest scoring P-47 ace with 27 victories. His final combat report, filed May 8, 1945, was typically understated. Mission accomplished. No German fighters encountered. Recommend all P-47 units stand down. There's nothing left to fight. In the end, they called it the Jug. But what they'd really built was a flying wrecking ball that demolished the myth of Luftwaffe invincibility, one shattered Messerschmitt at a time. The fat, ugly, underpowered fighter had become the most feared aircraft in the European theatre, not through elegance or speed, but through the simple, brutal effectiveness of American industrial might applied to the science of aerial warfare. The Germans never built anything that could match it. They never had time to try. Subscribe for more stories that'll change how you see the machines that won the war, one impossible victory at a time.